And also the other thing too is the film festivals, they often bring in talent. So they bring in directors and actors and other people who do Q&As. You can learn so much. You can make so many connections that way. Um, I mean, here, perfect example. This is a good story for you. And this is all about connections.
Because I remember back in it was the 80s, the guy that did the trauma films used to do those events where you'd have
Yeah.
people at festivals walking around with people, they weren't attending, but they'd be there with the suits on from the film and
Yep.
kind of creating a spectacle. And a lot of people even thought it was a bit ridiculous, like, this looks kind of goofish, but it really helped get people on board with buying into those films for the sort of subculture that they were feeding into. And I think, people probably don't think of that idea very often, even though it seems to be, still very effective.
Well, this is a really good one, but I mean, talking about trauma, who's the biggest director who came out of trauma?
Oh,
James Gunn. James Gunn started at trauma.
yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, this is a thing that I talk to with people about. I mean, you and I met
Hmm.
at TIFF.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we live in Toronto, and every September, TIFF is on. And you know what? If you work in the industry, if you're trying to get into the industry, attend TIFF.
Hmm.
Go and see one film and understand how the film festival works.
Hmm.
And then also start digging deeper because, as you know, and I know, there are so many resources for filmmakers, actors, directors, producers, during composers, editors, like the whole industry during that week.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's you can get yourself a low level industry pass and go and see panel discussions and symposiums. Okay, there's meet and greet parties, there's cocktails, there's parties and receptions everywhere. Okay, and also use your social media.
Mhm.
Uh, like the person that we met, the way that we met, is someone I follow on social media, and I saw that he was in Toronto, and I reached out to him. Then I saw him on the street.
Yep.
I see actors, Toronto actors, who complain about like, oh, it's for the elite. We can't get in. I'm like, well, what have you been doing? Well, nothing. I'm like, you haven't seen a film. You haven't done like, then I see other actors and I look at their Instagram and it's like selfies them on red carpets for this film, even though it's not their film, at this party, meeting these people. And it's like, you tap into that.
Yeah.
You have to be a degree, you and I think we're the same. You've got to be a degree of an extrovert for
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
But if you live in Toronto, it's an amazing resource. I mean, that's one thing I'd say is if you live in a city and there's a film festival, no matter how big or small that film festival is, go to it and support it
Yeah.
because you're going to be able to tap into a lot of different resources that you might not realize are there. Mixers for people who are in the industry, get involved in learning about people's stories that they want to tell. The amount of people that I've met, even before I started the film festival. I mean, my first week in Toronto, coming from the country, uh, I was here for graphic design, going to college, and I stood in line for the first year of the Midnight Madness program at TIFF. And in that lineup, I met three guys who to this day are all active parts of my life. And that was 1988. Okay.
It's so true because I mean with and you're referring to Mark Klebanoff, who
Yeah.
I talked to on here a while back, and yeah, I didn't expect to see him at all because I found out about him, like you said, through social media. It's one of the assets you've got to utilize. Just he had a system of producing his films that I wanted to kind of get into discussing with him, and wouldn't you know it, because we're here at this hub where TIFF happens. It was an opportunity to meet up and have a beverage and find out more in person. And I didn't even think of it at the time we started talking. And when we were halfway through that segment, I realized, oh, you're going to be in Toronto. We may as well sit down, have a drink, and then we met you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's festivals are remarkable resources.
yeah.
But the key thing I always say is make sure you see one film.
Hmm.
Make sure
Hmm.
you just see one film because if you're at a mixer if I'm at a mixer at some kind of cocktail party and I start talking to someone, I'm going to ask them like, "Hey, what have you seen?" If
Mm.
they can't tell me a film, then I'm like, "Well, are you really into this or not?"
Yeah.
Like you like it's like, okay, you're just here to kind of mingle and schmooze. Like
Mm.
be invested, just lose yourself in a film. Just go. Doesn't matter like, and also the great thing about TIFF is just pick anything. You might not like it, but you're gonna see something different. You're gonna have a talking point. And
Yeah.
also the other thing too is the film festivals, they often bring in talent. So they bring in directors and actors and other people who do Q&As. You can learn so much. You can make so many connections that way. Um, I mean, here, perfect example. This is a good story for you. And this is all about connections. So I used to do one of the things I was really into was Hong Kong films. Okay, films from Hong Kong. I was like into John Woo films and Jackie Chan films before those guys came to Hollywood. Okay, I'd go to Chinatown, I'd go to cinemas in Chinatown, and I'd watch these films on the big screen. I'd be the only white guy in the audience, the only guilo in the audience, watching a legitimate Jackie Chan film. And I started writing about it. I did like a little fanzine, like a photocopied fanzine. This is how I got into the industry, was about writing about films that I loved.
Mhm.
And so I had this published little fanzine about these films. And one year, and I was going to TIFF as an audience member. And one year I saw this amazing film from Mexico called Cronus.
Mm.
Okay. It was all about this vampire device that this old man finds. And it was a twist on the vampire film. It was so fresh and original. And I got to meet the director and do an interview with him. And he liked Hong Kong films too. And I gave him a copy of my zine. And we had like an interview with a friend of mine talking about Mexican cinema and Mexican horror films. We like met in a like the very Toronto reference. We met in a Coffee Time Donuts. Okay, this is how highfalutin we were. This really dingy Coffee Time Donuts beside the Sutton Place Hotel. There's another deep cut Toronto, uh, and we had like a almost like a 90-minute interview with this guy.
Mm.
Well, guess who I can now call a friend? And anytime I see him, he sees me and he's like, "Look at us. How long has it been? We're still talking about films." That was Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, amazing.
So that
Amazing.
was Guillermo del Toro for his first feature.
Wow. Wow.
And I had access to him.
Mhm.
Like especially if you're building career, start talking to these directors when they're young.
Yeah.
Start talking to these directors when they're fresh and you can get access to them.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he and we have kept in touch. And it was funny because we were coming out of a film at Lightbox, and I ran into him and I was with my wife, and he turned and he's like, "How long has it been?" And we're still arguing about films.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so film festivals are just a great place. And there's a number of local actors I've had to just like, guys, get your heads out of your butts
Mhm.
and be proactive and do these things and don't sit back and complain about it. Like
Yeah.
the carnival has come to town, and you honestly don't even have to pay to go in. You can do stuff on the periphery and learn a lot and further your careers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and speaking of resources, that's one of the things I wanted to find out from you too, because obviously, if you're near festivals, that's one. But in terms of you guys and what you're doing, are you developing? Because of course, going directly to you is one way, obviously, in terms of consulting. But are you developing? Or whether it's books or online systems that people can plug into for you guys? Is there anything that you guys are have in the mix coming up?
Well, right now, I mean, so if people need to find me, uh, they can find me Ultra 8 Pictures, www.ultra8.ca. Just do a search for Colin Geddes and Ultra 8 Pictures, and it'll pull up my Instagram and all of that stuff. But what we're doing is, and this is my wife and I have just been talking. It was something we actually started doing in the pandemic. Like I said, I was just name dropping Guillermo del Toro.
Mhm.
We know some really interesting people. And when they come to town, we go out for drinks and we have great conversations. And I'm like, oh man, I wish I could share some of this stuff with people. Before the pandemic started, we started doing some live sessions. We did these invite only, up close and personal discussions. We did one with Darren Bousman, who's the director of all the Saw sequels. We did one with Simon Barrett, who was the director, the writer of Your Next, directed a film during the no, before the pandemic called Seance. And these were private industry only things. We basically opened a bottle of rye, put it between us, and started drinking and talking in front of
Nice.
30 people, in front of 30 people. Well, then the pandemic shut all that down. But we started thinking like, well, maybe we actually should start doing this as a podcast.
Hmm.
So right now we'll be launching it in the spring. We're developing a podcast, which is just going to be a short, punchy podcast, probably around half an hour. We're just going to talk to some of our friends in the industry and beyond, just to ask them some key questions. Or we're working on something like, who were you before the pandemic?
Hmm.
But what was your life during the pandemic? And what's your life like now? What are you working on now?
Hmm.
We also want to talk to, though, people about what their productivity hacks are.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, what do you do that sets you apart from other people?
Yeah.
How do you tackle your day that gets you leverage momentum to go further?
Hmm.
So we're hopefully going to be launching that for around the spring. Other projects, and we basically do consulting. If we see a project and we really see that it shines, we'll come on board as producers. We did that with a film called Mad God.
Hmm.
That was our kind of pandemic pivot. Mad God was a film directed by special effects legend Phil Tippett, who won an Oscar for Star Wars, Jurassic Park. He did all the miniature special effects for RoboCop, Starship Troopers, like in Star Wars, the holographic chess scene in the Millennium Falcon. He did
Hmm.
all that. So this guy's made an impact on all of our lives. We've seen all of, like, if you're in a film, you've seen his stuff. And he did this insane stop motion feature film that was kind of like a passion project, and people around him and his company, they just like let him do that thing. And
Hmm.
it was never taken seriously. And then we got to see the final thing and we're like, oh my God, this is insane. The level of craftsmanship. So we came on board and helped them make a new poster, new trailer, developed the festival strategy, and then took on sales, which is
Hmm.
something that we rarely do. And we were able to sell it to AMC. We were able to sell it to France, Germany, Japan. I just saw the art for the Italian edition coming out in February,
Hmm.
and it went on to great critical accolades.
Hmm.
And that was a film where, like, you know what, we see the potential in this. Let's help it. And so we came on board as executive producers. Um, so we're always looking for a project like that. They are rare when we want to make the decision to come on board a film.
Hmm. Hmm.
But right now we're focusing, like I said, on developing the podcast because just there's so many interesting people we know in our lives that we want to share those conversations with others.
And that's amazing because that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to start having these conversations and doing this because there are so many people who are deeply entrenched in the business on one level, whether it's as an actor or as a writer or as someone who's been maybe doing a lot of films in their community, but they haven't figured out how the commercial side of it works, or they've been doing a lot of commercial work as an actor or as a writer, but they want to kind of move something themselves, and they need to talk to people like yourself, who can help them put those puzzle pieces together because there's so many silos in this business that you can kind of get anchored into because there's a lot to do in those silos. But if you want to start to move in the producing side of things or getting things made and getting them out commercially that you're taking initiative on, yeah, you need a lot of guidance, a Sherpa, so to speak.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of different people you can listen to. There's a lot of resources out there. And I mean, it's always good to listen to other people's stories.
Hmm.
Look at the directors of films that you like. Again, looking at smaller films and start going into the archives of magazines and go to the library and listen to their stories. Like there's a treasure trove of stuff out there. I mean, if you think about just like even just commentary. So here's a gift. Go to the library, get DVDs, listen to the commentary of DVDs, and you're going to get lots of information.
Yeah.
Subscribe to magazines like Filmmaker. There's so many resources there. Um, yeah, I mean, we've seen people who've been able to make little films, even with actors they got off of Craigslist.
Yeah.
that will get like international distribution.
Well,
Um, yeah, I mean, it's also always thinking, if you're serious about film, it's a long game.
yeah.
Okay. It's not going to be immediate. It's not a get rich quick thing. You're doing it because you love it, and you're doing it because you love working with these people.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's amazing. Colin, I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and I want to encourage people to check Colin out at ultra8.ca. Do I have that
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Ultra8.ca.
yeah, and he is a man with more than just stories, but a lot of information, and it sounds like a great team as well. So I hope that we stay in touch along the road, and I hope you join us again next time. But remember, for now, we'd like you to fight the darkness, put truth in story, keep making those films happen. Thanks for joining us on this one, and we'll see you next time.